Welcome to another episode of WHU Inside Business. Today, we are here with Famke Krumbmüller. Famke Krumbmüller is an associate partner at EY-Parthenon and in the Geostrategic Business Group. There, she drives the political risk insights, geostrategy, and business development efforts for EMEA-based clients. Welcome, Famke.
Nice to be with you.
So, to start with, we would like you to ask what fueled your passion for geopolitics in the business world early on, because it is something like nobody starts this job because they're like, oh, I wanted to be something like this when I was 4 years old. But where does this passion come from, and when did you realize, okay, this is something for me to focus on?
That's a great question, and it's true. I did not know that I wanted to work in political risk when I was 4 years old. I can guarantee that. So, I think I grew up in an environment. I grew up in Brussels, so I grew up in an environment that was always very international, and it, I guess, made me realize um, how, even though we're all Europeans, for example, what the big differences are between the countries and the cultures and the way of functioning, etc. And that we all need to function together in order to do great things together. Um, and so I guess I did develop early on consciousness and awareness of what these differences could mean. And so I went on to study European affairs and political science, political economy, and spoke several languages or still speak several languages, and therefore then kind of slipped into this line of business that allows me to really kind of help businesses understand politics and different political culture, etc.
I mean, obviously, part of your job is to stay always up to date and to the current affairs and current news. Which main aspects about the current geostrategic environment and its impacts on business worldwide would you currently highlight? And what are some key trends or factors that, for us, like the general public, should be aware of?
Yeah. So I think maybe the most important thing to keep in mind is that we are really currently going through a relatively fundamental shift. The war in Ukraine, from our perspective, for example, is the most significant geopolitical event since the fall of the wall in Berlin. So that's more than 30 years. So really something fundamentally is currently changing. And what that is that I think the form of globalization that we have been in for the past decades is fundamentally being questioned. What is the form of globalization that we've been in? It is continuous integration, continuous liberalization, a drive towards kind of always more efficient and less costly, etc., no matter where certain things in the world would be produced. And now the pandemic, as well as the war, highlighted what it means to be so globally dependent. So that is currently being called into question. And because that is called into question, a lot of business strategies that were set up years and maybe even decades ago, the way that managers, business managers, executives think about the world, all of that is being called into question. And obviously that's a very structural and fundamental change. And then, a lot of the developments, if not all of the developments that we're currently following, kind of play into this broader context. So the relationship with China, all of these things are part of that development. That's what I would really point everybody to. It's fundamental change.
Yeah, we were talking, regarding fundamental change and everything being kind of intertwined with each other. What would you say? mm, would you say that these recent changes also they have affected like priorities and management decisions? And could you maybe name me some examples for it?
Yes, so I think with what has happened in the past couple of years, maybe most importantly, the war in Ukraine, a lot of businesses realize that this is something that they need to deal with, so that politics, political decisions, political developments will impact them. And therefore, they are now trying to understand, are they equipped internally to deal with with the consequences of what is happening globally? That's the first question that they're asking themselves. And then the second question um, there is about, do our strategies, our investment decisions, our risk management operations, do all of these still make sense in the current environment? So to give you a very concrete example, we have made the decision 5, 10 years ago to invest in China and to produce in China because it was the cheapest and most efficient way to do so. Is that decision under current circumstances where geopolitical risk will matter so much more? Is that still a viable decision? So kind of the re-evaluation of decisions, I think, is the most important thing that's currently happening.
Talking about reevaluation, for example, China or other economies, how do you assess the risk of operating in different geopolitical regions for companies from various industries, and how do you help, EY-Parthenon as a consultancy? So how do you help basically your clients develop strategies to mitigate those risks?
So whether it will be a risk or an opportunity, there's always a flip side. For you to operate in certain geographies depends very much on the sector that you're in. If it's a more strategic sector from a government perspective, so for example, technologies, healthcare, etc., it's more likely that you will be more exposed to geopolitical tensions. And this is where the second aspect comes in. It will matter where you're from. So where are you headquartered? Where's your brand from? And then where are you operating? So if you're operating across borders of the blocks that are currently starting to emerge. So for example, to give again a very kind of obvious example, if you're a Chinese company operating in the US in the technology sector, you're more likely to be exposed to certain levels of political risk, geopolitical risk, etc. The way that we help companies deal with this is that we essentially help them implement what we call a geostrategy, which broadly consists of 3 buckets. Each of them are kind of relatively big, but I'll just tell you all 3. The first one is about helping them understand the political environment. So just kind of scan the environment for what is happening, what are the developments, what could happen next, where, etc. The second aspect is focus. So what does it mean for my company, for my sector, for my different business functions? So how do all of these political developments that have been identified impact me? And then the third bucket is translate this into strategy, translate it into enterprise risk management, into investment decisions, etc. So really kind of then take everything that we've learned in the first 2 steps and make it an integral part of business decisions.
That's really interesting. So what would you say, like, if you have, for example, like recommendations for leaders or management teams, who are currently in this in this area of assessing risks, and you having so much industry expertise, how do you stay informed? What would you advise, for example, to your clients to stay informed about recent geopolitical environment, and also informing teams, and task forces to face those challenges effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how big you are and how much internal capacity and expertise do you have. Because if you have the space to have somebody internally or even a team internally which is able to follow this and understand, that's a really good start. That's a really good thing to do. It can be a single person, it can be an entire team. Otherwise, have at least one person who gets it and who's able to then go to outside sources, get the help of good sources, of consultants, etc., to bring it into the company and translate it into the company needs. I think that's the first big thing. Evaluate what these needs are and what your internal capacities are in order to deal with some of these things. The other recommendation is to have somebody on the board who understands these issues and who's able to ask the right questions and point the business into the right direction. Ultimately, the main aim with political risk management is to, as I always say, try and not only just install the alarm once they have broken into your house. So that is too late, right? Once the political risk event affects you, it's too late. Then you're just kind of mitigating the impact. Ideally, you manage it, which means you need to anticipate it, which means you need the expertise in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, You talked previously about, like the flip coin, the flip side of risk is opportunity. So, from your current perspective, what are like the most significant opportunities, for value creation, yeah, emerging, from the current landscape that we have, and how
Mm.
can, yeah, basically companies benefit across different industries, and how do you also assist them in capitalizing on these opportunities?
Yeah, so the opportunities I think stem also from the fact that we're moving towards a world that is much more regionalized, if not localized in certain sectors. It means that, because we have this geostrategic competition between blocks, um, countries are investing a lot, or when I mean countries, I say especially the EU and the US, are investing a lot in sectors that they consider to be strategic and of vital interest to them. A lot of money is going into the digital and the green parts of our economies, and that is in order to be able to incentivize companies that are local. To produce locally, to do research and development locally, etc. So a lot of opportunity comes from all that investment incentives and money going to these very specific sectors. Um, Another opportunity is to explore alternative markets to the markets that you've been in traditionally right now, because there's so many shifts. Maybe other geographies and markets in the world become attractive that have not been considered before, and so that creates opportunities for business and also for these countries.
Mhm. So you touched upon a little bit about sustainability, and my question would be, where do you see sustainability intersecting with the current geostrategic landscape? Mainly because for some companies it may be something that's hindering their business model. For some of them, it may be able to benefit for them. So what opportunities and challenges does sustainability basically present for businesses, and how should we address them, or how should other
Hmm.
leaders of companies address them?
Hmm. That's a great question and then a very complex one. I think one of the main intersections that there is that the whole drive towards the energy transition, managing climate change or responding to climate change, the whole sustainability question is all very much driven by regulation and therefore by political decisions. Um, so the coherence of the regulation that you see between countries and between regions is very much dependent on how much cooperation you see between these countries and regions. And what we're currently seeing is that there is not a lot. So the EU is doing one thing, other members of the G20 are doing other things, for example, and that leads to huge divergence in sustainability regulations. And what this means for business is that it's very complex to follow. Because it's constantly changing. It's very different depending on what geography you're in. And it just makes the navigation of these new regulations so much more complex and burdensome, um, that creates really a big challenge. That's really one of the main links that we can see between sustainability and political risk. There are many, many others. There's the whole question around climate change and migration and food security and more conflict in certain zones as a result of all of these dynamics. So there's really huge kind of interdependence between sustainability, climate change, and political risk. But I've teased a couple of them, but I think more to come, unfortunately, over the next couple of years.
Yeah, just to pick up a little bit on that tease that you gave us, to be a little bit more specific, for us, you're basically practicing, from Europe, us as European citizens. What role do you think does Europe play in the current global picture of political and economic circumstances?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think what we've seen happen in Europe over the past couple of years is that Europe is obviously a an entity that has always been very much driven by a normative foreign policy. So this is this idea that you influence the world around you through norms and regulations, um, and it continues to want to do that and to do it, but it is now at a stage where, given the geopolitical developments and tensions with the US, with China, um, Europe finds itself in a position where its kind of traditional normative power might just not be um, sufficient anymore. It does not respond to the current challenges, right? There's a war on the continent, and so it is kind of moving into a direction of trying to become, I always call it, less naive to a certain extent. So trying to find new ways to exist in this world, continue to defend its values, but at the same time, its interests. This is where the concept of European strategic autonomy, you might have heard of, is starting to emerge. So this idea of being less dependent on the rest of the world, but still being open for trade. Open strategic autonomy is the full way that the Europeans like to talk about this. So Europe is really kind of, to summarize a very, very big subject, Europe is really kind of at a crossroads, trying to take a more assertive place in the world order, I would say.
And how do you personally, or how does EY-Parthenon like assist the leaders in understanding and addressing, that there's like sort of like an ethical and even social, implications of geopolitical challenges in their decision-making processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think with regards to that, the first step is to understand as a business what you are exposed to, and that in certain circumstances you don't have a choice whether you like it or not. I think, for example, that businesses nowadays cannot be apolitical anymore, whether they like it a lot or not. A lot of businesses say we don't want to be involved with politics. We are not political actors, and we want to stay far away from it. But I think the reality is that these days, as a business, you are actually making political decisions based on where you're operating and how what are some of the decisions that you make are by nature you taking a political stance. So business as an apolitical actor does not exist anymore, and I think that is the first very important thing to understand. And starting from there, you need to also understand that the decisions that you make can be political / ethical decisions, and these are better taken consciously rather than unconsciously or just being slipped into. That's the main thing that I would say.
hmm And now a bit more of a personal question, throughout your career and your expertise. In your experience from working with many people in leadership positions, what are the most crucial leadership skills and attributes that enable executives to effectively basically lead multinational teams in like such a diverse geopolitical context?
The two words that come immediately to mind is curiosity and openness, meaning that you need to be able to be open and kind of question your own understanding of the world, take in different viewpoints. And I think it becomes incredibly important because we're in a world where a lot of companies, certainly in the Western world, have a very Western-centric vision. Um, but that might not represent anymore what a majority of the world actually thinks. And I think that is very important to take into account. And so, kind of this ability of curiosity, openness, and questioning your own point of view is very central in order to get a good vision of what's actually happening.
Yeah, basically being able to adapt also to the current environment and
Agility.
yeah, agility. That's it. As an expert, on agility or on this topic, what are some of the like practical strategies or actions that, for example, us students or young professionals starting out in their career can take on to enhance their skills, broaden their perspectives, and stay adaptable, in the face of like these evolving geopolitical or geostrategic challenges?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there are many things that you can do. Um, I always think it's very important to, again, like just apply the same principles that I just mentioned for leaders. Um, Talk to people, be open, question your own point of view. If when you make an argument, make it based on facts. Question yourself. So really, just speak to people with different backgrounds, different kind of country or geographical or cultural backgrounds, but also from different businesses. Um, and so just make sure that you have a very kind of broad understanding because it will allow you to kind of try and have an overview everything that's going on, and be as open-minded as possible.
Yeah, being open-minded as possible sounds like really good closing words. Um, I would say, yeah, thank you so much
Sure, my pleasure.
taking the time. And yeah, the viewers will have enjoyed it to get so many gems in this talk that we had. And yeah, wish you all the best and hopefully see each
Thank
other.
you to
Sure.
you too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, also to the viewers, this was WHU Inside Business. I hope that you guys tune in for the next episode. Bye bye.